What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's edition of Everyday Discipline, where we decode, deconstruct, and yes, reverse engineer self-discipline for you to get whatever it is you want in your life. My name is Brent Kokel, and I am your host, but that is not all that I am. I have many things to many people, right? We got friend, we've got businessman, we've got all sorts of stuff. We've got athlete, we've got husband, we've got father. Father. Let's talk about that one today because that's the story that I want to take you on. Learn a very, very valuable lesson from a second grader who isn't even my second grader yesterday when I was volunteering at a field day at my kids' school. So my kids go to this school that is a charter school here in California. We put them in there for the first time this year. The school just really lines up with our morals and our ideals as a family. And so it's worth the trip to get our kids out there. It's about 25 minutes each way. So my wife spends about 2 hours a day in the car dropping them off and then bringing them back home. And I help out a couple times a week when I can, but the brunt of it goes on her. One of the requirements for parents of children in this school is that we spend a certain number of hours volunteering every year. Now, the cool thing, I'm going to talk about this a lot coming up, I'm volunteering to teach a couple of classes to the high school kids next year on business and entrepreneurship and sales and marketing, and I'm super excited about that, but didn't have the opportunity to do that this year. Instead, I had to volunteer at what's called Field Day. So it's the end of the year kind of celebration. And my job was to walk around with my son's second grade class. Now, my son is 8 years old, as a majority of the people in 8th grade. And they would go to all these different stations at Field Day where they'd play different games. They had an obstacle course race. They had this giant beach ball, probably the beach ball, biggest one I've ever seen. Maybe it was like 10 feet across. It was massive. And then they would play beanbag, and then they would play basketball and foursquare and all the typical stuff that you would see at an elementary school. But there were also a couple of things that I hadn't seen before. One of them was this game about passing the water. And how this would work is they would line up in 3 lines. They would get themselves together as a class, and they'd separate into 3 lines. In reality, the adults were helping them do this because you can't leave that to a second grader. And each of them had a red Solo cup. You can picture a red Solo cup. You've drinking more beers out of them than you can probably remember. So you know what those look like. You see the second graders. They've got red Solo cups. And in the front of the first second grader, there is one of those orange 5-gallon Home Depot buckets filled with water. Now here's the idea as it's getting explained to these kids. What it is that the first person goes down into the Home Depot bucket of water with the red Solo cup, fills up the red Solo cup, standing with their back to the person behind them, pours the water over their head, and when executed properly, the kid behind them is going to catch all the water in their cup and then do the same thing to the person behind them. And the idea of this game is that nobody's going to spill any water. That's it. Now, you can imagine how this goes. They start out and they're actually doing what they're supposed to do, but then it just turns into this thing where I'm going to spill as much water as I possibly can on my classmates, and I'm going to laugh my ass off when I do it. And I don't blame them because it was 102 degrees outside, and let's face it, hey, they are in second grade. So pretty soon, maybe 5 minutes after they start this, it is a full-on water fight. And the parents that are there are filling up more Home Depot buckets so they can throw more water on each other. And everybody's laughing and yelling, and it was awesome, except for this one kid. This one kid caught my eye, and it was because he wasn't wet yet. He was getting pissed off at the kids that were trying to pour water on him. Now, his whole thing wasn't that he didn't want to get wet. Because that was my first thought. I'm like, oh, this kid doesn't want to get wet. That's why he's pissed off. That's why he doesn't want to do what everybody else is doing. But then I overheard the conversation, and he talked about the fact that they weren't, quote, winning the game by doing the things that they were doing, throwing the water on each other. The game to him was you get the water, you put it in your cup, and then you pass it to the person behind him, and you don't spill a drop. And I'm sure this kid's looking around on the ground like, oh my God, there's so much water on the ground. We are losing this game. What he didn't realize was that the other kids were the ones that were actually winning the game. That leads me to the lesson of this episode, which is that the real purpose is not always what you think the real purpose is. The real purpose, it's not always what you think the real purpose always is. Now, it's pretty obvious in the story that I just told you that the purpose wasn't really to not spill any water. The purpose was to give you something to do and some type of problem to solve just long enough to distract you from doing what you really wanted to do, which was be a second grader and get in a water fight at school and, by the way, throw water on your teacher. Not me, the actual teacher. So that's what they wanted. It's simple to see in that, but it's a little less obvious in your adult life as you walk through all the different scenarios. I know it certainly hasn't been obvious for me every single time. So a good example of that is a couple of years ago, I flew up to Boise, Idaho, and I got picked up at the Boise airport by a retired Navy SEAL. And this Navy SEAL was going to drive me out to an undisclosed location somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, where another 10 Navy SEALs were waiting to teach me how to win a gunfight should I ever get into a gunfight. And they were teaching me and several other people, and it was this entire weekend scenario where you go there and you learn something about pistol, you learn something about rifle, and then you start doing all these different scenarios, and they've got all this cool stuff there. Like they've got like burned out cars, like we were on the streets of Baghdad when we were invading Baghdad. So you'd understand what it really was like to be in these gunfights. Now, what I thought and what I was convinced my purpose was for going there was exactly that, to really, really elevate my skill set necessary at angles and accuracy, especially under pressure. Not that I ever want to get in a gunfight. Like that is not what this is about at all. But God forbid I ever end up in a gunfight. I would just love my chances to be a little bit higher because I got some elite training and SEAL training. I can't imagine anything more elite than that, especially when we're training at the location where like all the special forces of the United States military go to train, this undisclosed location that I don't even know where it is. Like I couldn't find it again if I had to. I wasn't blindfolded or anything, but there's no way that I could find this location again. Now I thought that's what I was going there for, was to elevate my skills. But there was this one lesson that the lead instructor talked about that has stuck with me ever since then, which is the simple lesson of front sight focus. Now, if you're familiar with firing guns, or shooting at anything, you know that there is a rear sight and a front sight. And the front sight is really where your round is going to go if you execute all of the tactical stuff properly when it comes to pulling the trigger and aiming and everything like that, right? Front sight focus is where it's at. But what he was talking about this was in the context of his life in getting in a ton of gunfights as an operating Navy SEAL. Front sight focus was a critical lesson for him. And what it meant was that there can be all sorts of chaos going on in the world around you, but you're not going to be effective if you do not keep focus on your front sight. And he was teaching this in the context of teaching us how to shoot better. Front sight focus, because there was all sorts of stuff going around. People running everywhere, people yelling, them trying to create stress for us. And it was front sight focus. Front sight focus. And then when you're done with that, just front sight focus. Now, had I thought the purpose of going up there was simply to elevate my skills, I would have missed the larger lesson, which is front sight focus, which, by the way, is applicable to every single area of my life. And I'm going to have you consider your life as well, because there can be chaos going on in the world around us all the time, especially as a modern businessman, modern businesswoman, all of these things, right? This is a big thing that goes on. We've got people competing for our attention all the time. We've got people doing, oh man, all sorts of stuff. Our phones are bugging us all the time. Our computers, like my computer that is sitting right in front of me, has gotten like 5 text messages while I've been delivering stuff about getting distracted. If that's not God speaking through this and making sure you hear that message, I'm not really sure exactly what is, but we've got all these things coming on around us. In business, we've got multiple aspects, different product lines we're trying to sell, different customers we're trying to make happy, different employees we're trying to put in the right positions at the right time. And it can feel overwhelming, like there's chaos all around you, but guess what? Front sight focus. Just get the thing that's right in front of you and everything else is going to take care of itself. That's it. That's all you've got to be able to do is front sight focus. So I got that lesson because the purpose of me going up there was to learn exactly that lesson. So really, when it comes down to it, what do you need to do about this? You've heard this story, you've understood the lesson, but if you're new to the show, you don't yet know what the fee of the show is. And the fee of the show is that you've got to do something to improve your life in some way, shape, or form, given the lesson of this episode, in the next 24 to 48 hours. That's all that I really ask of you, and that's what you should demand of yourself. You really should. You should demand that of yourself, which is you want to get better. So here's a question I want you to ask yourself. Where is it in your life are you fighting too hard to accomplish what you think is the real purpose of accomplishment? And what could be an alternative purpose for that thing you're struggling with right now? That's really the question. Picture yourself as the kid who was upset when everybody else is having fun because you're not, quote, winning the game the way that you think the game needs to be won. Picture yourself as that kid. And that's going to give you exactly the answer you need to do. So you're going to figure that out, and then guess what? You get to do something about it. You get to figure out what the real purpose actually is. And that might mean that you get to experience more joy and less frustration, and if that's what you get out of it, man, that is awesome. Nothing would make me happier than if that was you. So there you go, guys. You got your lesson. You got your call to action. Your job is now to go do it. But I do ask one more thing of you, which is that if you got something out of this episode and you know somebody that might need to hear this message today, whenever it is you're listening to this, please share the episode with them. All you've got to do is hit the little share button, whether you're listening on your phone through audio only. You can just copy and paste a link into a text message of this episode here. Send it to whoever you need to. As many people, by the way, as you want to send it to. I'm not going to be mad if you send it to 150 people or 151. And if you're watching on YouTube, then you can hit the share icon as well. It is a great, tremendous honor to me if you do that, if you feel called to do that. I certainly appreciate it. All right, guys, that's it. That's for the show today, everybody. I'm going to do my job and come back next time. I want you to do your job, and you come back too.